My name is Ethan Monroe, and I want to share with you the story of the night I died. I don't say that metaphorically. I died, clinically, medically, and undeniably, in the spring of 2002. At a remote U.S. Air Force base outside of Kandahar, Afghanistan. I was 36 years old. A former combat engineer turned maintenance specialist, assigned to inspect electrical systems in underground bunkers built decades ago. But this wasn't just any night. And I wasn't just any patient. For years, I'd been exposed to JP-8 jet fuel, toxic solvents, and other chemicals that coat everything in a war zone. At first, I ignored the fatigue, the chest pains, the tremors in my hands. I chalked it up to stress, desert heat, and the demands of being the guy who gets it done, no matter what. But over time, my health declined fast. By early 2002, doctors confirmed what I already suspected: my heart was failing. Not just weak, but end-stage congestive heart failure. Every major organ in my body was under siege. I was dying slowly, from the inside out. On March 17, 2002, it all came to a head. It was just past 9 p.m. when I collapsed in the middle of the maintenance hangar. I remember a surge of pain across my chest, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my ribs. I went into a type of arrhythmia called ventricular tachycardia, the kind of irregular heart rhythm that doesn't just knock you off your feet, it ends you. They rushed me to the ICU trailer on base, a makeshift field hospital set up near the airstrip. I was barely conscious, but I could still hear the frantic voices of medics and the clatter of equipment. For almost 7 hours, I was in and out of cardiac instability. But around 4 a.m., something changed. My heart rate spiked to over 250 beats per minute. It was like my body was being electrocuted from the inside. I knew, in that moment, I wasn't going to make it. I started to pray, not in a desperate, bargaining kind of way, but in a surrender. I had fought long enough. The pain was beyond anything I had ever experienced. I whispered, "God, I can't take this anymore. Please, take me." I closed my eyes, and right then, something extraordinary happened. I felt a violent jolt. A pop inside my chest, followed by a brief, sharp flash of pain, not drawn out, but instantaneous, like the final snap of a cable under tension. That was the moment my soul left my body. The noise in the room, the beeping monitors, the shouting, the chaos, all disappeared. Total silence. I became weightless, aware, and oddly at peace. But instead of floating upward or seeing some kind of tunnel of light like the movies portray, I found myself suspended in a dark space. Completely still, with no walls, no ceiling, just an infinite black void. And yet, strangely, I wasn't afraid. I was alone, but not alone. There was something, or someone, in the darkness, watching me, not with eyes, but with presence. And that presence began to speak, not out loud, but directly into my mind. It told me I could stay, that I'd suffered enough, and that in this place, I would feel no more pain. It was seductive, this offer. There was something comforting about the emptiness. It offered peace, but not love. And that distinction mattered. I began to feel that this presence wasn't offering safety at all. It was baiting me, trying to get me to surrender my will. The comfort wasn't pure, it was hollow, like synthetic kindness without warmth. Something in me stirred. I realized this couldn't be heaven. Not without Jesus. I had sensed his presence when I was dying, a quiet companionship even in the chaos, and I knew, deep down, that the peace I was being offered now was a counterfeit. If Jesus wasn't here, then I didn't want to be here either. I remember saying, not out loud, but from the core of my soul, this can't be it. I want Jesus. The moment I said that, everything shifted. Behind me, a light appeared. I hadn't seen it before, but now I knew it had been there the whole time. It was so far away, like a distant star just beginning to rise over a horizon I hadn't realized I was standing on. And I knew, deep in my bones, or what felt like bones, that this light was where I belonged. That's when the void started to tremble. I wasn't being pulled into the darkness anymore. I was turning toward the light. And that was only the beginning. As I turned toward the distant light, something changed inside of me. The silence of the black void cracked ever so slightly, like the surface of a frozen lake groaning under pressure. I was still surrounded by pitch black, but now, I had a direction, a purpose. That light far off in the distance wasn't just bright. It was alive. I didn't walk. I didn't float. I simply moved, as if my very will propelled me forward. But the more I focused on the light, the more I could feel the darkness around me begin to resist. Like sticky tar, it tried to pull me back. Not with force, but with suggestion. You don't need to go there. It whispered, not with sound, but inside my thoughts. You've earned your rest. You've been through enough. Stay. Be still. Let go. It was persuasive, almost soothing. It offered me freedom from pain, from fear, from memories, and for a fleeting moment, I almost believed it. But then came another voice. Softer, but stronger. A whisper not of manipulation, but of truth. Turn to me. That was all it said. Just 3 words, but they shattered every lie the darkness tried to feed me. This whisper wasn't coming from the black space. It came from the light. The light that now pulsed with warmth, like a sunrise breaking through the thickest storm. It didn't shout. It didn't plead. It simply invited. And somehow, I knew. This was Jesus. The difference between the 2 voices became clearer than anything I had ever known. One offered comfort, but without love. The other offered love, even if it came with challenge. One offered oblivion. The other offered eternity. That realization stirred something deep inside me, memory. In an instant, I remembered a night when I was 6 years old. My great-grandmother had just passed away. Everyone in my family was in tears. On the ride home, I sat silently in the back seat, trying to be strong. That night, I crept out of bed, got down on my knees, and prayed the longest prayer I had ever said in my young life. I didn't know what I was doing. I just poured out my sadness. And I remembered feeling something, warmth, like invisible arms wrapping around me. That was the first night I ever truly felt God. And now, in the vastness of this void, that memory came flooding back, not as a faint recollection, but as a living moment. I could feel it, relive it, inhabit it. I knew without a shadow of a doubt, God had heard that child's prayer. And He had answered it. That memory broke the last thread holding me to the false peace of the void. I turned, fully and completely, toward the light. As soon as I did, everything changed. I didn't move in the way we move on Earth. There was no sensation of acceleration, no wind against my skin, no gravity or resistance, but I was there, in front of the light, in a heartbeat. And what I saw defied all earthly understanding. The light wasn't just light. It was love itself, poured out in radiant waves, touching every part of my soul. I could feel it penetrating me. Every wound, every scar, every ounce of pain I had carried for so many years was being washed away in its presence. And yet, even as I soaked in that love, I noticed something else. I could still see the darkness behind me. I hadn't lost awareness of it. It was as if I could see in every direction at once, behind me, around me, and most of all, into the light. But now, my focus was completely on what lay ahead. The light grew in intensity, but it never hurt my eyes. It was different than any light on Earth. There was no heat, no glare, no exhaustion from looking at it, only peace. And then, something even more remarkable happened. I began to understand, not just emotionally, but intellectually. My mind opened in ways I never thought possible. I remembered things I hadn't thought about in decades. I understood concepts I had never studied. It was like having 1,000 tabs open in a browser, but with perfect clarity in each one. There was no stress, no confusion, just pure understanding. I began to grasp history, not just my own but humanity's. I understood how time worked, not as a straight line, but as a single eternal moment, always present, always unfolding. And I knew, this light had no end. I looked for the boundaries of it. I turned my gaze left, right, up, down, but there were no edges, no limits. It was infinite, eternal. And then, I felt it even more deeply. This light wasn't a place. It was a person. It was Jesus. I hadn't yet seen His face, but I knew. I could feel His presence the way you feel the sun warming your skin, even with your eyes closed. The light was His love, pouring into me like a river, like a flood, not violent, not forceful, just unending. And I knew exactly what I wanted. I whispered, from the depths of my soul, I want to be with you. The moment I whispered, I want to be with you, everything around me responded. I didn't hear thunder or see a flash of lightning. I didn't get swept up in a dramatic cinematic swirl of clouds and trumpets. But what happened was far more profound. The light opened. It didn't explode or shift dramatically, it simply welcomed me. I was standing at what felt like the threshold of eternity. And now I was being invited in. The light wasn't just around me anymore, it was in me. It flowed through my soul like a current, like a river with no beginning and no end. I stepped into it. Immediately, I was surrounded by something so powerful, so pure. It defied every word we've ever created to describe goodness. It was love, but not the kind you hear about in songs or see in movies. This was love as a force. Love as an environment. Love as the very air you breathe. It filled me, not just emotionally, but spiritually and mentally. I didn't just feel better, I felt whole for the first time in my life. There were no broken pieces. No lingering shame. No confusion. Everything I had ever longed for in this life was present and alive in that light. As I walked deeper into it, I began to see more, not with my eyes, but with my entire being. I was in a space, a realm, that felt limitless. All around me were other beings, radiant and human-like, though far more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen. They glowed with a kind of inner brilliance, like they were made of light and peace themselves. They weren't standing in rows or marching or speaking. They were just there, waiting, as if they already knew I was coming. And at the center of them all, like the heartbeat of this place, was him. I still hadn't seen his face, but the moment I turned my focus to the center, I felt a rush of love so intense. It nearly knocked me over. It poured into me like water through a fire hose. Yet there was no force. No pain, only joy. Pure, overwhelming joy. I was finally in the presence of Jesus. But still, I couldn't yet see his face. It was as if the light was too bright, too layered in depth and glory for my soul to fully process. I knew he was there. I knew he was the source of the love I had felt the entire time. But the clarity of his features, his eyes, his smile, his expression, remained just outside my grasp. I found myself wanting more. Not more light, not more knowledge, not more peace. I wanted him, his face, his expression, his eyes looking into mine. And so I asked, Jesus, I want to see your face. In that instant, the light around him seemed to settle, just enough for me to begin to make out his form. Slowly, the light condensed, and a human shape emerged. He looked nothing like the images in stained glass or the paintings in Sunday school classrooms. And yet, he was everything they ever tried to capture, and infinitely more. But here's the strange part, and I still don't fully understand this, I couldn't retain his image. Even as I looked at him, even as I stood in complete focus, I couldn't memorize his face. It was like watching a living animation, constantly shifting, constantly alive. It was the same face. But each moment brought a new detail, a new dimension. I couldn't lock it down. I couldn't file it away. It was like every second was a new introduction. And I knew why. It wasn't because he didn't want me to remember. It wasn't because he was hiding. It was because he wasn't a memory, he was a presence. You don't remember Jesus. You experience him. His eyes, though I couldn't recall their color, looked directly into the very core of me. There was no hiding, no pretending, and yet, there was no condemnation, only mercy. I had sinned, I had fallen, I had justified things in life that I knew were wrong. But now, standing before him, all of that was exposed. Every detail of my life, every thought, every motive, every hidden action, played out before us like a panoramic life review. And still, he loved me. I saw not only what I had done, but how it had rippled out, hurting others, hurting myself, and yes, hurting him. That was the hardest part. He didn't show me my sins to punish me. He showed me because I needed to understand the truth. And the truth was this: even at my worst, he never left me. He had always been near, even when I cursed him, even when I doubted, even when I felt completely alone. He had been waiting, not just to judge, but to heal. And in that healing came clarity. This is what we were made for. Not for survival, or ambition, or performance. We were made to be in perfect communion with Jesus. To know him, to be known by him, and to live fully in the ocean of his love. I wasn't being interrogated, I was being restored. And I would have stayed there forever, had he not asked me a question that would shake me to my core. Why would you want to go back? Standing there in that river of love, face to face with Jesus, though still unable to retain the details of his face, I felt more alive than I ever had on earth. There was no fear, no doubt, no pain, just peace, clarity, and an overwhelming sense of being home. That's when he asked me. Not harshly, not in accusation, but with gentle curiosity and deep purpose. He asked, "Why would you want to go back?" It echoed, not like sound, but through every fiber of my soul. The question didn't come across like a test. It was more like an invitation to search my own heart. And at first, I had no idea how to answer. Instinctively, I began listing reasons. Well, my family, I thought, my career, my responsibilities. I could help people, I could inspire others, I could do something good. The thoughts came quickly, like someone stacking index cards trying to build a case. But with each one, I felt it, empty, not because those things weren't good. They were. I loved my family deeply. I valued my work. But in that moment, I realized something I had missed my entire life. None of it mattered without God at the center. All of the reasons I gave were about me. What I could do. What I could fix. But his question pierced through every excuse. It wasn't just, why go back? It was, what's the point of returning if you're not going to love the way I love? And that's when it hit me. His love, the very love that had filled me, cleansed me, sustained me in this place, wasn't just for me to enjoy. It was meant to be shared, multiplied, poured out. I couldn't keep it for myself. That love was the point. It wasn't about achievements or redemption through action. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about letting others experience the same mercy I had just received. So I told him, from the depths of my heart, I want to go back to love like you do. And with that, I knew I'd answered the question the way he hoped I would. He didn't smile or nod like a man might, but I felt his joy, like a sunrise breaking inside me. Not just approval, delight. And then he gave me 3 things, 3 instructions. Simple but life-altering. He didn't mean just with words. Yes, he affirmed the value of structured prayers, rosaries, psalms, blessings before meals. Those matter. They create rhythm. They train the heart. But he showed me something deeper, prayer as a way of life. He wanted me to understand that every action done in love can be a prayer. Picking up trash so someone else walks a cleaner path. Smiling at a stranger. Letting someone cut in line without grumbling. These things weren't meaningless gestures, they were, in his eyes, holy. And that reframed everything for me. Life wasn't about religious performance. It was about alignment, doing the small things with great love, and doing them for him. This one felt heavy, but not in a burdensome way. Jesus didn't minimize suffering, he had lived it. He chose it, from the manger to the cross. He entered into human agony with open arms. So when he told me I would suffer more if I returned, he wasn't punishing me, he was inviting me into communion. He showed me that suffering wasn't just about enduring pain. It was about transforming it, letting it become fuel for compassion. A bridge of empathy, a deeper well from which to draw mercy for others. He told me I would experience more pain than I already had, physical, emotional, spiritual, but this time, I wouldn't walk through it alone. And I would understand why it mattered. This was the foundation of it all. Everything he gave me, every truth he showed me, every drop of mercy, none of it was mine to keep. He said the greatest thing I could do on earth was to love others the way he had loved me. That meant seeing past people's sins, not ignoring them, not pretending they weren't there, but loving the person while rejecting the sin, not through condemnation, but through invitation, calling them into something higher, into the love of a Savior who had already paid the price. And he assured me, even when I got it wrong, even when I failed to love well, he would make it count, as long as my motive was love. As he shared these things, I felt an incredible mix of sorrow and joy. I didn't want to leave this place. I didn't want to leave him. But at the same time, I couldn't stay. Not now, not yet. He was giving me a second chance. Not to fix my past, but to live my purpose. I turned, though I didn't physically move, and I saw it. The light behind me began to shift, giving way to the path I had come through. The tunnel was still there. But now, instead of a black void on the other side, I saw the outline of my hospital room, machines flashing, people moving, my body lying still, and I knew, it was time. As I prepared to leave that place of glory, I felt no fear, no regret, just this quiet, unshakable certainty. His love would go with me. Leaving heaven was not easy. It wasn't the kind of place you walk away from casually. The presence of Jesus, the warmth of his love, the boundless light, none of it could ever be replaced. Not by anything this world had to offer. But I wasn't going back for the world. I was going back for his purpose. I turned, though I didn't need to move in the physical sense, and immediately the light around me began to shift. It wasn't fading. It was releasing me. That love I had bathed in didn't disappear. It folded into my soul like a seed planted deep, ready to bloom wherever I was sent. The tunnel that had once brought me into eternity now opened before me again. Except this time, the black void was gone. No shadows whispered, no counterfeit comfort lured me away. Instead, I saw the ICU room at Bagram Airfield, right where I had left it. From where I hovered, or rather, from where I existed, because there was no hovering, like we understand it, I could see everything. The machines, the chaos, the panic. There were at least 15 people crammed into the small space, shouting orders, checking monitors, performing CPR, administering shocks. Outside the room, Several more stood frozen, watching, unsure whether they were witnessing a miracle or a tragedy. And then, I saw myself. My body was lying on the hospital bed. Still, pale, and broken. Tubes covered my face. A defibrillator patch was strapped across my chest. And a nurse was holding paddles near my ribs. My arms were limp, my head tilted awkwardly to the side. I knew what that meant. I was still dead. And yet, I felt no fear, not even hesitation. There was no choice to make now, it was simply time. As I approached my body, I expected some kind of shock or resistance. But instead, I felt a strange unity. As if I was stepping back into something familiar. Like slipping on a well-worn coat you didn't realize you missed. Then it hit me. The pain. It returned with such violent force. I nearly cried out, though I couldn't. My chest felt like it had been crushed by a concrete block. My ribs, broken from chest compressions in the Lucas machine, screamed with every tiny breath. My head pounded, my limbs ached, and my lungs burned as if I had just run a marathon at high altitude. But more than the physical pain was the weight of re-entry. Re-entering a fallen world was like crashing through layers of static and noise. The purity I'd felt in heaven, where thoughts were clear, time was fluid, and distractions didn't exist, was replaced by chaos, noise, fear, cluttered minds, beeping machines, human panic. I could feel it all. I opened my eyes. At first, everything was blurry. The harsh fluorescent light above me stung. A voice nearby shouted, "He's back, he's back." Another person cursed in disbelief. My throat was dry, and my body was restrained. Later, I'd learned they had strapped me down to keep me from harming myself during convulsions. Electrodes covered my scalp. Cooling pads wrapped my head to prevent brain swelling. I had tubes in my mouth, my nose, even in my veins. It felt like waking up inside a war zone. And in many ways, I had. A doctor leaned over, eyes wide. He had a stunned look on his face. The kind you'd see on someone who just witnessed something he couldn't explain. Through the mask on my face, I struggled to speak. The words came out muffled, broken, but he leaned in closer. "Did I just die?" I asked. He stared at me, stunned. Then he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "you did. For 10 minutes. You were gone. 10 minutes. No heartbeat, no brainwaves, no respiration. Medically speaking, I shouldn't have been able to wake up at all, let alone speak coherently. But I remembered everything. Not like a dream you try to piece together in fragments. This was different. I remembered the light, the face of Jesus, the life review, the 3 instructions, and even the moment I left and came back. And yet, something else had shifted. My senses weren't just dulled by pain and medication, they were clouded by distraction. Earth was loud, cluttered, and impatient. The tunnel, the connection I had felt to heaven, closed like a curtain. Not because the door was locked, but because my mind was no longer tuned in. The distractions were too strong. But I still had the memory. And more than that, I had the mission. Over the next few days, I remained in critical condition. Doctors warned me I might have brain damage. They were baffled that I could form sentences, let alone recall my name or explain what had happened. Tests were run, scans were done, consultations poured in from specialists. They couldn't explain it. Eventually, I was stabilized and flown to a military hospital in Germany. From there, back to the States. And all the while, I clung to what Jesus had told me. Pray more, suffer joyfully, share his love. And yes, there would be more suffering. That much was clear. But now, I had something I didn't have before. Perspective. The pain was real, but it wasn't the end. It wasn't even the beginning. It was part of the purpose. After I was flown back to the States, I spent the next few months recovering in a veteran medical center outside of San Antonio, Texas. I wish I could say things got easier. But the truth is, the suffering Jesus told me about, it came. Not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually, too. My body was wrecked. Every joint felt like it was filled with gravel. My chest ached constantly from the cracked ribs and repeated shocks. My lungs burned from the oxygen tubes. But none of that compared to the feeling of being separated from that light. That love, back on earth. Everything felt dull by comparison. The hardest part? That silence. In heaven, I had been completely connected to Jesus. To every soul, to eternity itself. Now, my thoughts felt like they were bouncing off walls again. God didn't leave me, I knew that, but down here. It was just so easy to feel distracted, confused, and alone. Still, I remembered what he said, pray more. Suffer joyfully, share his love. So I did. I prayed as best I could. even if it was just in groans. I thanked him for the pain. Even when I didn't understand it, I tried to smile at nurses, to encourage other patients, to ask visitors how they were doing. It wasn't perfect, but I was trying to live the way I had promised him I would. 2 years passed. By then, my body had declined again. I was put on the transplant list. My heart, damaged from years of chemical exposure and then worsened by the cardiac arrest, could no longer keep up. I was told it was a miracle it had worked this long. The doctors finally called me in. We have a match. On a cold morning in February of 2004, I was wheeled into the operating room for a heart transplant. It was risky. At any moment, my organs could fail. The new heart might not take. But I felt calm. I remembered what Jesus had said. He was giving me a new heart. At the time, I had assumed it would be symbolic. But this was literal. The surgery took hours. I don't remember any of it. But what happened afterward stunned even the most experienced medical staff. When they opened my old heart to examine the damage, they found extensive scarring, so much that several cardiologists later told me that heart should not have worked at all. They pointed out specific areas. Here, the smooth muscle had turned to fibrotic tissue. There, the electrical signals were blocked entirely. 5, maybe 6 different zones were completely dysfunctional. Any one of those failures should have caused total cardiac arrest. But somehow, it had kept beating. Their conclusion? Medically, it's unexplainable. But for me, it was simple. God had kept it alive. He didn't miraculously restore it. He sustained it, broken as it was, long enough for me to fulfill part of the calling He had given me. And now, He had literally placed a new heart inside me, just like He said He would. After the transplant, recovery was brutal. My immune system had to be suppressed. I had to relearn how to move, how to breathe, how to live with foreign tissue inside my chest. I faced complications, infections, days when I begged for the pain to stop. But even in that, I began to understand something deeper. Suffering wasn't punishment, it was invitation. Every ache, every setback, every fear, it was a new chance to surrender, to trust, to offer that pain back to Him as a prayer. I wasn't just surviving, I was learning how to worship through the wounds. And here's what amazed me even more. I started to share my story, quietly at first, with other veterans in the hospital, with chaplains, with visitors, then in support groups, then online. I wasn't preaching, I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just being honest. And something happened. People wept, people listened. Some told me they had lost faith after losing loved ones. Others said they'd always been afraid of dying. But after hearing what I experienced, what I remembered, they began to hope again. I saw it clearly. This was why He sent me back. It wasn't to be pain-free. It wasn't to go back to my old career or build a comfortable life. It was to plant seeds of hope, seeds He would water. And the beautiful part? I didn't have to be perfect at it. I just had to love. Even in weakness. Sometimes that meant praying with someone on a bench outside the VA hospital. Other times, it meant picking up the phone at midnight because someone was on the edge of giving up. But always, it meant remembering the 3 things He told me. Pray more. Suffer joyfully. Share His love. That was the real transplant. Not the organ in my chest, but the mission in my soul. To this day, my medical records still say, miraculous survival. But I know better. It wasn't a fluke. It was a calling. One of the most beautiful and humbling parts of my near-death experience wasn't just the light, the love, or even the overwhelming peace of heaven. It was this moment, standing before Jesus. My soul completely exposed, and still being loved. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting that. Before I died, I carried a lot of guilt. Some of it was from obvious failures, things I'd done that hurt others. Times I reacted in anger. Moments of pride, selfishness, or bitterness. But much of it came from justifications, times when I felt wronged and thought I had the right to retaliate. As a military man, I was trained to be tough, to defend, to fight back, and sometimes, that fight didn't stop when it should have. But standing in front of Jesus, there were no more justifications, no excuses. Everything was clear. I saw my sins not as isolated mistakes, but as waves rippling through the lives of others. A harsh word spoken in anger didn't just disappear, it lingered. It wounded. And Jesus let me feel how those moments had impacted others, how they affected Him. Not because He was offended, but because He had felt their pain too. Even more painful were the things I didn't do. The times I could have helped someone, but didn't. The opportunities I missed to love, to speak life, to show compassion. I had always assumed the real sins were the big ones. But now, I realized, sometimes what we withhold can be just as damaging as what we do. And yet, through it all, he never turned away. Jesus looked at me not with condemnation, but with mercy so deep, I could barely stand under the weight of it. His gaze didn't crush me, it healed me. There was no shame in the way we experience shame on earth. There was no rejection. There was only a holy grief, a sorrow not rooted in fear, but in real love. It was the kind of sorrow that makes you want to be better. Not because you're afraid of punishment, but because you can't bear to break the heart of someone who loves you that much. I remembered something from the New Testament. Something Paul had written. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret. That's exactly what I experienced. In that place, Jesus let me see the entire story of my life. Not in chronological order, but as a single living moment. There was no time in heaven like we know it. It was as if everything existed all at once, my childhood, my mistakes, my prayers, my moments of compassion, my failures, my regrets. And then, something remarkable happened. Jesus brought me back to a moment I had long forgotten, a night when I was 6 years old. Kneeling beside my bed after my great-grandmother passed away. Everyone in my family had been grieving, and I didn't want to upset anyone more. So that night, I prayed quietly by myself. It was the first time I remember talking to God on my own. I didn't know if it mattered. I didn't know if he was listening. But I poured out my heart the only way a child can, honestly. And now, decades later, Jesus brought me back to that prayer. Not just the memory, but the feeling, the warmth, the peace that settled over me afterward. And I asked him, "Did you hear me? Did you really answer that prayer?" His response wasn't verbal. It didn't need to be. I knew. He had heard it. He had answered it. He had been with me even then. That realization overwhelmed me. My whole life, I had wondered if my prayers mattered. I had doubted. I had questioned. But now, there was no more doubt. Not only had he heard me, he had been guiding me all along. He then showed me something even deeper. I was able to sense the thoughts of the other souls around us, not in a noisy or chaotic way, but in harmony. I was still fully aware of my own thoughts, and yet completely connected to everyone else. It was like perfect unity, without confusion. This was communion in its truest form, not just people standing next to each other, but souls joined in complete understanding. There was no jealousy, no ego, no comparison, just love, pure, radiant love. And that's when I realized something important. All the pain I had experienced, all the suffering, it hadn't been wasted. Jesus showed me how those wounds, those broken places, had made space for his love to come in. Had I not known what it meant to be shattered, I wouldn't have fully appreciated what it meant to be healed. He didn't erase the scars. He redeemed them. Every act of forgiveness I had struggled through. Every time I chose to keep going when I wanted to quit. Every tear I cried in private, he had seen it all. Nothing was forgotten. Nothing was lost. And the truth was, the worst parts of my story, the sins, the shame, the suffering, had become the very places of connection. They were now bridges, not barriers. That's when I understood. This is why he sent me back. To tell people that they are not too far gone. That mercy is real. That Jesus doesn't run from our brokenness, he runs to it. I hadn't earned my way into heaven. I was invited. And that invitation is extended to everyone. That's the miracle. Not just that I died and came back, but that I came back for a reason. As Jesus looked into me, not at me, but into me, I realized there was nothing left to hide. Not from him, not from myself. And strangely, that didn't terrify me. It freed me. I understood, more deeply than I ever had, that he didn't love a better version of me. Some future me who never made mistakes. He loved me, the broken, wounded, doubting version who had failed and repented and failed again. And that kind of love, it changed everything. It was in that fullness of love that Jesus asked me the question I never expected. Are you ready to go back? There was no pressure in his voice. Only purpose. He had already told me I could stay. But now, he was offering me the choice again, this time. As someone who had seen the truth. My first instinct was to say no. How could I leave this? How could I turn my back on such perfect peace? But then I remembered what I had said earlier. Back when the light first opened and the darkness lost its grip. I want to go back, to love. And now, that commitment had to become action. I turned to Jesus and whispered, "Yes, I'll go. If it means I get to carry your love to others, I'll go." There was no flash, no booming voice, no thunder, only a warmth that enveloped me, as if heaven itself was embracing my choice. And then, He gave me final instructions, not new ones, but confirmations of what he had already spoken into my spirit. Pray more, not just with words, but with a life lived in constant communication with God. Suffer joyfully, because suffering is not the enemy of joy, but the soil it grows in. Share my love, because that's the purpose of every breath, every heartbeat, every moment we're given on earth. As I turned to leave, I didn't feel like I was walking away from Jesus. I felt like I was carrying him with me. The light began to shift again, and I saw the tunnel, the same one I had passed through before. But this time, I noticed something different. There were other tunnels, branching off in the periphery. I don't know where they led, or if I was supposed to see them, but what I do know is this. I wasn't the only one who had been given a choice. I focused on my own path, and slowly, the brilliance of heaven gave way to the familiar dullness of earth. At the end of the tunnel, I saw the ICU room, the same chaotic scene from before. Doctors, nurses, medical equipment, my body lying lifeless on the table. They were doing everything they could to revive me, and to them, it probably seemed hopeless. But to me, it felt inevitable. I was going back, not because I had to, but because I had been sent. I entered my body like slipping through a curtain. There was no resistance, no drama. One moment, I was surrounded by eternity. The next, I was back in the pain. Everything hit at once, the broken ribs, the ache in my chest, the weight of gravity pressing down on me. But it didn't matter. I was alive. I opened my eyes. The world looked different, not because it had changed, but because I had. The doctor leaned over me, stunned. I could see in his face that he had been seconds away from calling the time of death. But now, I was blinking up at him, fully aware, fully conscious. Did I just die? I asked, my voice weak beneath the oxygen mask. He didn't speak right away, just nodded slowly. Yeah, he said, you did. I smiled. That moment marked the beginning of a new life. Not because I had survived, but because I had been transformed. In the months and years that followed, I began sharing my story, not to draw attention to myself, but to point people to the one who brought me back. I told them what I saw, what I felt, what he told me, and slowly, people began to listen. Some found hope, others found healing, a few, faith, and that, to me, is the real miracle, not just that I came back from death, but that I came back with purpose. Even now, I live with chronic pain. My body still carries the scars of all I went through, before, during, and after my death. But I've come to understand something. Those scars are reminders, not of suffering, but of grace. Every time I pray through the pain, that's love. Every time I offer someone compassion, even when I feel empty, that's love. Every time I choose to forgive, even when I don't feel like it, that's love. And every time I tell this story, even if just one person hears it and turns toward the light, I know it was worth it. Heaven is real. Jesus is real. His love is the answer. I died, and I came back, not to prove anything, but to carry the one message that matters. Love is the purpose, and you were made for it. After I returned from death, nothing was the same, not the way I saw the world, not the way I related to people, and definitely not the way I viewed pain. I used to think life was about enduring hardship and pushing through. Just gritting your teeth and surviving. That's what we're taught, especially in the military. But now, I knew something much deeper. We weren't put here just to survive, we were sent to love. And love costs something. It often costs everything. I wish I could tell you that the rest of my life after my near-death experience was smooth, that everything got easier. But the truth is, I suffered more than ever. And it didn't surprise me. Jesus had told me it would be that way. The physical pain was relentless. My heart transplant had saved my life. But my body didn't bounce back easily. I had days where it felt like a truck had run over my chest, where I could barely lift my arms or climb a flight of stairs. I had to relearn how to do basic tasks. And the cocktail of anti-rejection medications left me feeling weak, dizzy, and vulnerable. But the spiritual ache was often harder. After experiencing heaven, the disconnect from that perfect peace was like a quiet homesickness that never fully left. I longed for the clarity, the unity, the constant awareness of God's presence. Here on earth, even the holiest moments were dim reflections compared to what I had seen. And yet, that ache was also what drove me. It reminded me that I wasn't back just to endure. I was here to serve, to speak, and to love like Jesus had loved me. So I began to write. At first, it was for myself, just to process the weight of what I had experienced. But as I wrote more, I realized this story wasn't mine to keep. It had been given to me. And it had to be given again. But I wasn't interested in fame or recognition. That's why I published my book under a pseudonym, T.S. Dismas. I chose the name Dismas because that was the name given by tradition to the thief on the cross, the one who turned to Jesus in his final moments and was told, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." That thief didn't earn heaven. He didn't work for it. He simply believed. That's exactly how I felt. I hadn't earned the grace I received. I had been a sinner. A broken man. Someone who had made more than his share of mistakes. But Jesus hadn't condemned me. He'd welcomed me. He'd called me home. And when I chose him, when I turned toward the light, he gave me eternity. I wanted people to understand that mercy is real. That love isn't earned, it's received. And that no one is too far gone. As people began reading the book and hearing the story, I started getting letters, emails, and phone calls from strangers all over the country. People who had lost loved ones. People who were battling terminal illnesses. People who had grown up in church but no longer believed God could love someone like them. They weren't looking for a hero. They were looking for hope. And that's all I had to give, a first-hand encounter with the mercy of God. I remember one man who wrote me from a hospital bed in Ohio. He'd just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. He said my story gave him peace for the first time since his diagnosis. Not because he thought he'd be healed, but because he knew where he was going. Another woman reached out from California. Her son had taken his own life the year before. She told me she'd stopped praying, stopped going to church, and stopped believing altogether. But after reading what I experienced, after seeing how Jesus responded to my brokenness, she said something stirred in her heart again. She prayed for the first time in months. That's when I truly understood, my pain wasn't pointless. It was a tool, a vessel, a channel through which God's love could flow into the world. Every scar I carried, every memory of suffering, every moment of doubt, it had become part of my testimony. Not a polished story of perfection, but a living witness of redemption. I no longer asked, why did this happen to me? Instead, I asked, how can God use this through me? And he did. In conversations with strangers at coffee shops. In hospital rooms where I visited veterans. In late-night phone calls with people who were ready to give up. In every one of those moments, I could feel that same presence from heaven, the warmth, the peace, the invitation. I hadn't brought heaven down with me, but I carried the memory of it. And that memory, when shared in love, became a window for others to glimpse the hope waiting for them too. So now, every day I wake up, even the hard ones, I remember that I'm living on borrowed breath. And with every breath, I want to love well. Because heaven isn't just a place we go. It's a reality we carry. And the more we live in that love, the more this broken world begins to look like home. More than 20 years have passed since I died in a dusty medical trailer on a U.S. Air Force base in Kandahar. The man who entered that ICU on March 17, 2002, never walked out. Someone else did. Someone who had seen the other side. I don't mean that in a symbolic, metaphorical way. I mean that I, Ethan Monroe, a former combat engineer with a failing heart, was literally pulled from death by the mercy of Jesus Christ. And I've spent every day since then living not with the fear of death, but with the responsibility of life. Because once you've seen heaven, once you've stood in the presence of perfect love, nothing is ever the same again. Some days, the memory of what I experienced feels as vivid as yesterday, every light, every word, every moment. Other times, it's quieter, like a song playing softly in another room. But it never leaves me. The truth of it is always with me, shaping how I live, how I love, how I see others. Before my death, I lived like most people do. I was busy, focused on my career, trying to be strong, trying to get by, trying to make sense of things in a world that often feels senseless. But when I met Jesus, when I felt his mercy flood into every broken part of my soul, I learned something I never want to forget. God doesn't just want our survival. He wants our surrender. Not surrender in weakness, but in trust. Trust that his way is better, that his love is deeper, and that our pain, when given to him, can actually be used. That's what I came back with. A message not of fear or fire, but of love, deep and personal. A love that doesn't just visit us when we're perfect, but meets us right in the middle of our mess. I've told this story in churches and living rooms, in hospitals and over phone calls with strangers who found my book. Sometimes I get emotional, sometimes I just sit in silence and let people cry. Because most of us, whether we admit it or not, are longing for hope. We want to believe that the pain isn't wasted, that the good we try to do matters, that the broken parts of us can still be loved. And they can. One of the most surprising truths I learned in heaven was this: God's mercy isn't measured in ounces, it's infinite. There's no tally board, no performance chart, just a father longing for his children to look up, turn around, and come home. That realization changed how I see everyone around me. Now, when I look at people, especially those who are angry, bitter, hostile, or hurting, I don't see enemies. I see souls that are starving for love. Just like I was. I see people trying to fill a hole only heaven can satisfy. And I no longer wonder if they deserve love. I simply ask, how can I love them better? Of course, I fail. I still have bad days. I still get frustrated. My body, even with a new heart, reminds me daily that it's fragile. But I try to remember that every encounter, every choice, every moment, is a chance to reflect the light I once stood inside. And that light wasn't just for me. It was for you. That's the most important thing I can say at the end of this story. Heaven is real. Jesus is real, and he wants you to know him. Not just believe in him from a distance. Know him, walk with him, talk to him like a friend. Invite him into your pain, your confusion, your guilt, your joy. He's not afraid of it. He already paid for it. And if you've ever wondered if God hears your prayers, yes, he does. Even the whispered ones. Especially the whispered ones. I know because I prayed one as a 6-year-old boy. And Jesus reminded me of it on the other side of death. If you've ever thought your sins were too big, they're not. I stood in front of Jesus with all my failures on display. And all I found in his eyes was mercy. If you've ever feared dying, you don't have to. Death isn't the end, for those who belong to Jesus. It's just the doorway to the place we were always meant to be. And if you've ever asked why you're here, why you're still alive, why your life matters, it's because love is your purpose. Love God, love others, share what he's done, that's it. I don't claim to be a prophet or a theologian. I'm just a man who died, and came back. Not because I was strong, but because Jesus is. I didn't earn it, I didn't deserve it, but he gave it anyway. And now, my job is simple: to remember, to obey, and to keep sharing the story. Until I finally go home for good.